HAMISH MCNICOL Last updated 1704, September 28, 2017. Air New Zealand is confident it will not be materially impacted by the fuel crisis. A person putting the country at a standstill by digging up a pipeline was not a good look offshore, the boss of Air New Zealand says. But Christopher Luxon was confident there would be no lasting impact on the country's biggest export, tourism, as the fuel crisis turned to making sure it did not happen again. Nearly 2 weeks ago, a pipeline shutdown from a refinery in Northland began to disrupt refueling at the country's major gateway, Auckland International Airport. Air New Zealand Chief Executive Christopher Luxon says the fuel crisis is not a good look for the country globally. The rupture meant airlines could only use 30% of their normal fuel requirements, forcing cancellations and disruption. Read more. Air New Zealand starts to restrict ticket sales and cancels more flights as Auckland jet fuel crisis deepens. Fuel pipeline cut outside our control, says Air New Zealand. Air New Zealand just seems to get things right across the board. Air New Zealand flights were axed, thousands of customers impacted, and the airline even took the extraordinary step of restricting ticket sales for some flights briefly. Airlines were restricted to 30% of their normal fuel requirements. But Air New Zealand Chairman Tony Carter told shareholders on Thursday the company did not expect the rupture would materially impact earnings this year. Chief Executive Christopher Luxon said the crisis had no impact on the country's tourism proposition, which was worth about $13 billion a year. We checked that, and we were monitoring that really closely as to whether that had any negative perceptions on the tourists coming to New Zealand, and the short answer is no. Thousands of passengers were disrupted by the fuel pipeline rupture. But does it look like a professional country offshore when you are trying to explain to the BBC that, actually, a guy with a digger dug up the pipeline that caused the country to stand still? That's not a good look. Luxon said it had received positive feedback from its customers who undoubtedly faced frustrations, but he thought the airline had handled it well. Staff had worked around the clock, coming in on days off, and pilots volunteered, as the airline had to deal with the actual consequence of the pipeline rupturing. It's been hugely stressful for our people. When we're the biggest carrier and we've got a huge responsibility to try and keep people moving and connecting to holidays and dreams and trips that they've had for a long time, it's really hard. Air New Zealand would now work through an insurance process over the coming months, Luxon said. The conversation would also shift to improving the infrastructure in a bid to not waste a good crisis. And fundamentally, we think they need to expand the storage facility at Wiri, and that just gives the country the stocks that it needs if, heaven forbid, another issue arose. What I was really impressed with over the last 2 weeks was the collaboration between government, the oil companies, the refinery, and the airlines, all working together. But now it's a good time for us to take a step back and say, well, how resilient is that infrastructure? Luxon said he expected any new government would be wanting to deal with fixing the issue. He was not sure how long this may take, but it was a conversation he wanted to start with the oil companies and the refinery. Clearly, what this shows is we can't have people impacting pipelines like this with diggers again and putting the country at a standstill. I'm very hopefully we'll get that fixed, and more than hopeful we need to get it fixed. Former Prime Minister Sir John Key was also formally elected as a director at the annual general meeting, gaining a base pay of $97,500. Stuff.